Hello and welcome to Independent Podcast Service. I'm Paul.
And I'm Dave.
And this week we are discussing Episode 7 of Kolchak the Night Stalker, The Devil's Platform. This episode originally aired November 15th, 1974. Let us start off with the number one song in America, Dave. Any idea what it might be?
Again, around in the 70s. I had a bit of a blast from the past listing from a couple particular songs kind of around the late 80s into early 90s and whatnot, but can't immediately think of anything around that range.
So it is Whatever Gets You Through the Night by John Lennon.
Okay.
Yes. Moving on to the number one film in America this week, Dave. Any idea what it could be?
Around that time. Can't specifically remember what would have been popular around then, as well as the one several weeks back from now. It's like, this was in a theater, but.
Uh,
Yeah.
Now, in all fairness, I don't know. It's a Western, and I don't know if those were typically very popular in the 70s. I know they were in like the 60s, but I think they had fallen off by now. It's also a rather infamous film.
I'm not too knowledgeable on a lot of westerns.
Um, so it's a movie called The Trial of Billy Jack.
Yeah, nothing in my repertoire.
Okay, it's part of a series, and it's considered one of the worst films ever made.
Mildly intriguing. Though, also the slight case of, oh dear God, what am I stepping into? What ideas are Paul getting now?
It's also nearly 3 hours long.
Oh wow. Movies in modern day need to step it up. They don't have the balls to go that long for typical movies.
Fucking Endgame did. Goddamn 3 hour movie.
Well, that's not too surprising with Endgame, but yeah.
Alrighty, so let us move on to the episode. Alrighty. So the episode begins with Carl in an alleyway, papered with political posters, providing his usual opening. July 21st, Springfield, Illinois. Eric Behringer, a major political contributor to incumbent Senator James Talbot, is killed in a car explosion. August 7th, Lake Michigan. Dennis DeSilva, former advertising genius and now speechwriter for the incumbent Senator Talbot, is aboard the family schooner, the Shooting Star. Carl notes, never was a boat so aptly named. It explodes. August 14th, Carl is rushing to senatorial candidate Robert Palmer's headquarters and waits for an elevator. In Palmer's 40th floor headquarters, manager Steve Wald is arguing with his candidate. Wald tells Palmer that he has checked in the candidate's hometown of Dantonville and found evidence of bribery and voter fraud. He threatens not only to quit, but to go public with what he knows. Palmer is unperturbed, getting into the elevator with Wald. As he does so, a secretary comes racing up with a briefcase. In the elevator, Palmer waves his hand across the panel, and the elevator plummets downward. Carl hears the elevator hurtling down. He rushes down to the basement as two maintenance men pry open the door, and Wald, dead, falls out. There's a dog atop the pile of corpses as Carl snaps photos. The dog leaps out, attacking him. In the scuffle, Carl grabs the dog's tag, bearing a strange star, before it runs off. Carl finishes getting photos of the ambulance, and as the ambulance and fire trucks arrive. As he leaves, unable to contact Palmer, the dog follows Kolchak at a distance. Carl goes into a bar run by his friend Louis. Carl persuades him to switch the TV to the televised debate. The incumbent, Senator Talbot, is present, but Palmer is missing. At INS, Carl is developing his photos. He takes the photo with the dog to Vincenzo. Carl is suspicious of the elevator accident. Wald was killed, and he suspects there might be a connection to the deaths of Behringer and De Silva. Vincenzo dismisses his suspicions since the deaths are occurring among both parties. Then he realizes that Carl wrote down his suspicions in the story that he just sent over the wire and rushes out. As they leave Vincenzo's office, the dog fades from the photo. A dun dun dun. Vincenzo and Carl are greeted by Miss Emily, arriving back from her vacation. She's brought gifts for the office staff, artichoke pasta for Vincenzo, because it has half the calories, and a new hat for Carl, which is a great cowboy hat, which he should have worn more because it was great.
It can't really be helped. He has such attachment to his old hat.
He does. Carl is less than enthused. Besides the gifts for the rest of the staff, Miss Emily has a bottle of holy water blessed by Pope Paul VI for herself. The two return to Vincenzo's office, still arguing over Carl's story. Kolchak notices that the dog has vanished from the photo. Tony assumes that Carl made an error in developing and calls his friend Henry DeWitt, editor of the Danville Herald. He has DeWitt send a package of background information on Palmer to Carl. Driving to the Palmer estate, Carl is met at the door by Lorraine Palmer, the candidate's wife. She doesn't know where her husband is, but seems unconcerned. Carl tries to interview her with little success. As Carl leaves, the dog from the elevator attacks him, ripping open his pocket and taking the tag. Carl returns to the house only to be greeted by Palmer himself. Suspicious. Back at INS, Carl relates to Vincenzo how Palmer turned down his request for an interview. August 16th, 8:30 a.m., Palmer goes to a secluded spot in Lincoln Park to meet with Susan Driscoll. She was Wald's secretary and was romantically involved with Palmer at one time. She isn't pleased at having been discarded once her usefulness to Palmer was over. She was bringing Wald's briefcase to him when he stepped into the elevator with Palmer. She tells Palmer that she went through the briefcase and found a sealed envelope. She knows everything about his shady past. She turns to see that Palmer has vanished and the dog has taken his place. It attacks her. Witnesses summon two policemen who shoot the dog. It stands there for a minute, then runs off unscathed. Driscoll is still alive and taken to the hospital. Carl goes to the hospital after hearing the police radio report. He talks with one of the policemen and tries to get a description of what happened. The officer is vague, but when pressed, admits off the record that he fired 6 shots point blank to no effect. Later, Palmer shows up at Driscoll's hospital room. She is unconscious. He grabs the IV bottle and causes it to bubble wildly. Driscoll's monitor flatlines. Speaking with the attending physician, Dr. Klein, Carl is unable to find anything useful. The doctor tells Kolchak feels that Kolchak, a layman, wouldn't understand the technical details. He threatens to get her in trouble by writing that Driscoll died under mysterious circumstances. The doctor asks what is mysterious. Carl responds by saying that she's not a crime reporter and wouldn't understand the technical details. Suitably annoyed, Dr. Klein reveals Driscoll died of a cerebral vascular blockage, aka a stroke. Back at INS, Carl is going through a book on dogs. The truly puzzling fact is that the dog has 5 toes. Ron notes that only wild dogs have this feature. Tony sends Carl to the Talbot press conference. At his headquarters, Talbot is being interviewed and dismisses his low poll rating. He's driving up to Lake Hollow for time off with his family. Carl just misses Talbot as he leaves. Cut to that night with Talbot on the road. An oncoming car drives directly at him. There's a huge crash, and the dog crawls out of the wreckage of the other car. Arriving at the impound yard, the policeman reports that the other car was stolen. There is no sign of the driver, and the only skid marks were from Talbot's car. There's no blood, and apparently no way anyone could get out of the car. Back at INS, Tony comes back from lunch with Carl staring off into space. He and Vincenzo discuss Palmer's chances. He'll undeniably defeat Talbot's governor-appointed interim replacement. Okay. Even Tony feels that the deaths have the potential for a good scandal story. The package from Tony's friend at the Danville Herald arrives, postage due. Carl sticks Tony with the postage. Going through the PR material, Carl sees a photo of a bare-chested Palmer by the pool, wearing a small medallion. In the INS darkroom, Kolchak pulls up the image several times, revealing an amulet with a pentagram matching the one the dog had. Miss Emily brings Carl a large stack of books about Satan worship and other sort of things of that sort. Carl ends up returning to the Palmer estate, looking for the press entrance. He ends up discovering, I'm just going to abbreviate the rest of it. He ends up discovering that Palmer is, in fact, a devil worshiper and is using that to gain political influence and wealth. And he offers basically Carl the same deal. I can make you a famous reporter if you're willing to get on this deal with me. Carl appears tempted but would like to think about the offer. He informs him that it expires almost immediately. If Kolchak doesn't agree, he becomes Palmer's next sacrifice. Carl tells Palmer he'd like to talk to his attorney, then makes a break for the door. It's bricked over. A knife-wielding Palmer comes at him, but Kolchak managed to throw him off and make his way back to the wine cellar. Palmer, transformed into his dog form, comes after him. Carl shoves a wine rack onto him and then throws the bottle of holy water. The bottle misses and shatters open in a corner of the cellar. The dog attacks Carl, but he manages to rip off the amulet and throw it in the puddle of the holy water. It dissolves with a crack of thunder. The hellbeast calms down, turning into a normal dog. We return to Carl in the alley in the wake of Palmer's disappearance. Speculation had it that he was kidnapped, possibly killed by radicals. Learning Palmer disappeared, Carl concludes, wherever she is, I hope she has a dog to keep her company, and fetch her slippers, and lick her hand. So that was the episode of Kolchak the Night Stalker. What did you think, Dave?
It was really interesting with going through the typical political issues and trying to get ahead in those sorts of cases, deals with the devil, with all that sort of stuff there. The two interesting things I found with that was especially how they used the story with the dog, that again the necklace was the big connection point between it. If he didn't have it, he was kind of stuck in that form, so there was a decent amount of time that he wasn't really in the story till he got it back, but was smart enough, knew how to get to particular places, essentially tailed Kolchak for that long to make sure he got it back. And not sure if even Kolchak really knew that that was the main connection point to it. And probably if his aim was off, he probably wouldn't have made it out of that situation.
Yeah, no, I quite enjoy this episode because you know, um, yeah, I think it is really interesting that like he does the whole like, oh, I'm gonna like rip this medallion off, and it's kind of like, well, that's just kind of dumb luck on your part because you didn't really know anything. And Kolchak has that a lot, where it's like he just kind of gets lucky a lot.
I think the other particular thing in that story is the introduction of the the name escapes me now. The old lady character that came back from her vacation.
Miss Emily.
Miss Emily, thank you. But just the case of, oh, she was a marvelous hoot coming into the story. Not only with her coming back and giving out the couple particular gifts and the Kolchak's gun of the holy water that she got for herself, but as well as her helping out in the office, having her get some of the materials that Kolchak was looking for, asking how his case was going, and especially with her, Kolchak, and Vincenzo having that three-way discussion between himself. And I'm really hoping
about the elevator.
About the elevator. I'm really hoping he's all right. That it was just more indigestion and not so much he was actually having a heart attack. Though, knowing his experience he has with Kolchak, it wouldn't be too surprising.
I will give you a minor spoiler. Vincenzo is fine. He does not have a heart attack.
No, just but that it kind of added to it. But there was a little twinge of, I really hope he's not going to die on one of these episodes.
No, this is the 70s. They didn't do stuff like that nearly as much.
Yeah,
I thought this was I really like this episode. I think there's some things that are kind of interesting about it. Like, they never tell you what political party anyone is. Which, I mean, like, I get why they would do that, because you don't want to, like, polarize the audience, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'm not sure how it is nowadays. It's kind of waxed and waned a little bit. There's certain sections of it, and there's less sections of it, but if you bring any of that sort of stuff up, it's gonna get ridiculous. And back then, it was probably even more heated or important in the standard mind of people.
When was, because there was actually, I don't know if it was the 70s or if it was the 60s, but there was a point where, like, I forget who it was. I think it was like might have been an independent thing, or if it might have been like a government agency, but there was basically, I think that was actually in the 80s, where they were like, the two parties, like the Democrat and Republican Party, are too similar. You guys have to differentiate yourselves more. And then that led to us being more politicized today. Well, not just that, but, you know. That
Yeah,
was
it's a multitude of things. Just those marvelous domino effects.
anyway. I could do like an hour on this, but that would probably get a lot of people very mad. So let us move on.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have nothing else about this episode, next week we'll be discussing a little episode called Bad Medicine. Any idea what this could be about?
On the one hand, it's the thought of a doctor supposedly going crazy with things, but yeah, who knows? Bad medicine might just kind of be a interesting title, and it might just kind of be a more typical ranged episode of Kolchak.
So not a doctor, but you're not in like well, not a medical doctor in the way we would think of it. But let's get into that. So this is going to be the first episode that is based off of a Native American legend. It's going to involve a shaman spirit called the... Oh, God, I'm going to try to pronounce this. Diablero? I don't know how to pronounce that. Murders for jewels to pay back his debt and be released from his earthly bounds. And you might recognize the actor who plays this. Does the name Richard Keel mean anything to you?
It's ringing a bell, but there's nothing coming a face wise.
Okay. You're not a huge James Bond fan, but you know who Jaws is, right?
Yes, I know of Jaws. Well, within bases, there's one or two films in the older section I haven't specifically seen, but there's been clips, base of the story of how things go, most of it.
It's dude what played Jaws.
Oh, okay.
He's gonna do a couple episodes.
Neat.
Yes, it is going to be very, very neat. So that will be next week, and it will be an interesting time. So until then, I'm Paul.
I'm Dave.